The flames licked at the horizon like the devil's own paintbrush, turning the late afternoon sky an ominous red-orange that made Madeline Ellis's heart pound against her ribs. She had never seen a prairie fire move so fast, consuming the drought-stricken Nebraska grasslands with terrifying speed and a roar that drowned out even her own screams for help. It was the summer of 1874, and Maddie, to most folks, had only been in Black Hawk, Nebraska, for 3 weeks. At 24, she'd come west from Philadelphia with dreams of independence and a teaching position at the newly established schoolhouse. But now, caught 2 miles from town after collecting wildflowers for her classroom, Maddie found herself in a deadly race she was rapidly losing. The wind had shifted without warning, driving the distant fire line straight toward her. Her long skirts tangled around her legs as she ran, her chest burning from exertion and smoke. Every direction offered the same hopeless view: tall prairie grass that would feed the flames, and nowhere to hide. The creek bed she'd been following had dried to cracked mud weeks ago in the relentless summer heat. "Help!" she screamed again, though she knew it was futile. No one would hear her over the approaching inferno, and even if they did, who would be foolish enough to ride toward such danger? The answer came thundering across the prairie in the form of a dark horse and its rider, cutting through the smoke like specters from another world. Maddie stumbled to a halt, disbelief momentarily overriding her terror. The horse, a magnificent black stallion, slid to a stop beside her, its nostrils flaring and eyes wild. The man astride it wore a dust-covered tan hat pulled low, his face partially obscured by a bandana against the smoke. "Get on," he shouted, extending a leather-gloved hand toward her. Maddie hesitated only a second before reaching for him. His grip was iron as he pulled her up behind him in one fluid motion. "Hold tight." The command was unnecessary. Maddie had already wrapped her arms around his solid torso, clinging to him as the horse wheeled around. But instead of racing away from the fire, the cowboy guided his mount directly toward a stand of higher grass. Maddie's scream caught in her throat as she buried her face against his back, certain he'd lost his mind. "What are you doing?" she shouted, her words whipped away by the wind. "Trust me." He called back, and then, to Maddie's horror, he reached into his saddlebag, withdrew a glass bottle filled with liquid, and struck a match. The bottle, a simple flask of whiskey with a rag stuffed in its neck, ignited with a whoosh. With practiced aim, the cowboy threw it into the grass ahead of them, creating a smaller, controlled fire that began consuming the prairie in a straight line away from them. Maddie watched in terrified fascination as the flames spread outward, eating a path through the grass. Behind them, the main fire was advancing with frightening speed, the heat pressing against her back like a physical force. "When fire meets burnt ground, it stops," the cowboy shouted over his shoulder. "I'm burning us an escape route." Understanding dawned on Maddie as the cowboy guided his horse to follow closely behind the smaller fire he'd created. The flames burned ahead of them, consuming the dry grass and leaving behind blackened earth ground that the larger fire would have nothing to feed on. For heart-stopping minutes they rode this way, heat surrounding them on all sides, smoke burning Maddie's lungs and stinging her eyes until tears streamed down her soot-stained cheeks. She could feel the cowboy's steady breathing beneath her grip, his body tense but his hands sure on the reins as he controlled his frightened horse. Then suddenly they were through, emerging onto a patch of rocky ground near a small butte where the grass was sparse. The cowboy didn't stop until they'd reached the far side of the formation, finally reining in his lathered horse. Maddie slid to the ground on shaky legs, watching as the massive fire continued its relentless march across the prairie. Joining with the smaller fire the cowboy had set and sweeping past their position, leaving them untouched in their island of safety. "That's called backfiring," the man said, dismounting beside her and removing his bandana. "Fighting fire with fire." For the first time, Maddie got a clear look at her rescuer. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 28 or 30, with sun-bronzed skin, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen, the color of a summer sky after a rain, vivid against his smoke-smudged face. "You saved my life," she managed, her voice raw from smoke. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Seemed the Christian thing to do." He extended his hand. "Kit Donovan, most folks call me Kit, Madeline Ellis." She placed her trembling hand in his. "Everyone calls me Maddie. I'm the new school teacher in Black Hawk." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Figured you had to be. Town's been talking about nothing else for weeks." His gaze traveled over her ruined dress and disheveled hair. "You're a long way from town, Miss Ellis." "I was gathering specimens for my science lessons." She gestured helplessly to the small basket she'd somehow managed to keep hold of, now filled with wilted, smoke-damaged wildflowers. Kit nodded, glancing back toward the still-burning prairie. "We'd best get moving. Fire's not an immediate danger anymore, but it'll be dark soon, and we've got a ride ahead of us." He helped her mount his horse again, this time settling her in front of him in the saddle. As they rode toward Black Hawk, Maddie became acutely aware of his arms around her, holding the reins on either side of her waist. She'd never been in such close proximity to a man before, and despite her exhaustion, she felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with their recent brush with death. "You know a lot about prairie fires," she said, partly to distract herself from his nearness. "Seen my share. Been ranching in these parts 8 years now." His voice rumbled close to her ear. "You learn quick out here or you don't last." "Where's your ranch?" "North of Black Hawk, about 5 miles. Donovan Place. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Run about 200 head of cattle." There was quiet pride in his voice. "What brings a Philadelphia girl all the way to Nebraska territory?" Maddie smiled, surprised he'd placed her origin so precisely. "How did you know I'm from Philadelphia?" "Your accent." "Plus, Mayor Simmons has been crowing about hiring an educated Eastern lady to civilize our prairie children." Maddie laughed despite herself. "I came because I wanted adventure and independence." She hesitated. "My parents passed 2 years ago. There was a gentleman in Philadelphia who felt certain I'd accept his proposal given my circumstances. I decided Nebraska sounded preferable." Kit chuckled, a warm sound that she felt more than heard with her back pressed against his chest. "So you ran from one fire into another." "It appears so. Though I'm grateful you were there to show me the way out of this one." The sun was setting as they crested the final rise that revealed Black Hawk below them, a modest collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street, with houses and farms scattered outward like seeds from a dandelion. Smoke from the distant fire still stained the western sky, but the town itself appeared peaceful, unaware of how close the blaze had come or that its new schoolteacher had nearly perished in it. "Will you be all right from here?" Kit asked as they reached the edge of town. "I should check my herd, make sure the fire didn't spook them too badly." Maddie nodded, suddenly reluctant to end their encounter. "Of course. Thank you again, Mr. Donovan. I quite literally owe you my life." He helped her down from his horse, his hands strong and sure at her waist. For a moment they stood close, his blue eyes studying her face in the fading light. "It was my pleasure, Miss Ellis." He tipped his hat. "Welcome to Nebraska." As she watched him ride away, Maddie had the distinct feeling that the prairie fire wasn't the only thing that had changed the course of her life that day. Little did she know how right she was. The next morning, Maddie awoke in her small room above the general store to the sounds of Black Hawk coming to life. Her body ached from yesterday's ordeal, and her throat felt raw from the smoke, but her mind kept returning to the cowboy who'd saved her life with such quick thinking and steady courage. She dressed carefully in one of her 3 teaching dresses, a modest blue cotton that brought out the green in her eyes, and pinned her chestnut hair into a simple bun. The town had provided basic accommodations as part of her teaching contract, this small but neat room, meals at the boarding house, and a modest salary that felt like riches compared to what female teachers earned back east, after breakfast with Mrs. Pennyworth, the boarding house proprietor. Maddie made her way to the schoolhouse at the edge of town. The one-room building had been freshly whitewashed for her arrival, with 10 neat rows of desks awaiting the 37 students ranging in age from 6 to 16, who would begin lessons next week. She was arranging her meager teaching supplies when the door opened, flooding the room with morning light. "Heard you had quite an adventure yesterday, Miss Ellis." Kit Donovan stood in the doorway, hat in hand. He'd cleaned up since yesterday, his dark hair neatly combed, wearing a fresh blue shirt under a brown leather vest. Without the dirt and grime of their escape, she could see how handsome he truly was, lean and tall, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested a man who smiled easily. "Mr. Donovan, I didn't expect to see you in town today." Maddie tried to ignore the sudden fluttering in her stomach. "Thought I'd check on you, make sure you weren't suffering any ill effects." He stepped inside, looking almost too large for the schoolroom with its small desks and chairs. "I'm perfectly well, thank you. Just a bit sore and smoky," she smiled. "I'm afraid the specimens I collected didn't fare as well as I did." Kit glanced at the wilted wildflowers she'd arranged in a jar of water. "I reckon I could help with that. Know all the best spots for wildflowers around these parts." "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose no imposition." His blue eyes held hers. "Besides, might be safer if you had a guide. Prairie's got more dangers than just fire." Maddie should have declined. A single woman going on an unchaperoned outing with a man she barely knew would cause gossip even in this frontier town. But something about Kit Donovan made her usual caution fade away. "Sunday afternoon," she suggested. "After church." His smile brightened his entire face. "I'll bring a picnic. Mrs. Johnson at the hotel makes the best fried chicken this side of the Mississippi." "Sunday it is, then." Maddie felt a blush creeping up her cheeks. As Kit left, Mayor Simmons was just arriving for his weekly inspection of the schoolhouse. The older man's eyebrows rose at the sight of the rancher. "Donovan," he greeted stiffly. "Don't often see you in town on a weekday." "Mayor," Kit nodded, setting his hat back on his head. "Just checking on Miss Ellis after her close call yesterday." The mayor's gaze darted between them. "Yes, I heard about that incident. Very fortunate you were nearby." "Very fortunate," Kit agreed, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Good day, Mayor. Miss Ellis." As he walked away, Mayor Simmons turned to Maddie with a concerned expression. "Miss Ellis, while we're certainly grateful for Mr. Donovan's assistance yesterday, I feel obligated to mention that he has something of a reputation in these parts." Maddie stiffened. "What sort of reputation?" The mayor cleared his throat. "He's a capable rancher, to be sure, but his background is somewhat mysterious. Arrived here from Texas during the war. There are rumors." "What rumors precisely, Mayor Simmons?" Maddie kept her voice level despite her rising indignation. "Nothing specific," he said hastily. "Just that he keeps to himself. Doesn't attend church regularly. And there was an unfortunate incident with the banker's daughter 2 years ago." "An incident?" "A broken engagement. Miss Hargrove was quite distraught." The mayor adjusted his spectacles. As the school teacher, you understand, you must be above reproach in all things. I understand my position perfectly, Mayor, Maddie said coolly. And I understand that I owe Mr. Donovan my life. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have lesson plans to prepare. After the mayor left, Maddie found herself distracted, her thoughts continually returning to Kit Donovan and the mayor's veiled warnings. She'd come west seeking independence, not to be constrained by small-town gossip. Yet she knew her position was precarious. Female teachers were expected to be moral exemplars, and contracts often included clauses about exemplary behavior. Still, as she worked through the afternoon, she couldn't help but look forward to Sunday with a sense of anticipation that had little to do with collecting wildflowers. Sunday arrived with perfect late summer weather, clear skies, and a gentle breeze that kept the heat bearable. Maddie sat through the church service, half listening to Reverend Goodwin's sermon on the parable of the Good Samaritan, her eyes occasionally drifting to the back pew where Kit had slipped in just after the service began. So he did attend church, contrary to the mayor's insinuations. Though from the surprised glances of the congregation, perhaps not regularly. After the service, Maddie endured 15 minutes of polite conversation with her students' parents before managing to extricate herself. Kit was waiting beside a wagon at the edge of the churchyard, a picnic basket and blanket visible in the back. "Hope you don't mind the wagon instead of horseback," he said as he helped her up to the seat. "Thought it might be more comfortable for you. It's perfect." Maddie settled her Sunday dress around her, aware of the curious glances from townsfolk. "Though I believe we're causing a stir," Kit chuckled as he climbed up beside her. "Small towns run on gossip like steam engines run on coal. They'll have us married with 6 children by supper time." Maddie laughed, feeling unexpectedly free as they drove out of town. "The mayor warned me about you, you know. Did he now?" Kit didn't seem surprised. "And what terrible tales did he tell? Nothing specific. Just that you're mysterious, and there was something about a banker's daughter." Kit's expression tightened momentarily. "Ah, Rebecca Hargrove, that's a story for another time, perhaps." He glanced at her. "Does it worry you? My mysterious reputation?" Maddie considered the question seriously. "I've found that people with nothing to hide often have the most boring stories to tell." That earned her a genuine laugh. "Well said, Miss Ellis. Please call me Maddie. I think saving someone from a prairie fire puts us on a first-name basis." "Maddie it is, then." Kit drove them to a sheltered meadow near a small creek, one that still had water, unlike the dried bed where she'd been caught in the fire. True to his word, the area was carpeted with wildflowers, blue asters, golden black-eyed Susans, purple coneflowers, and dozens of varieties Maddie couldn't name. After spreading the blanket in a shady spot, they enjoyed Mrs. Johnson's famous fried chicken, along with cornbread, pickles, and apple pie. Conversation flowed easily between them, with none of the awkwardness Maddie had feared. "How did a Texas cowboy end up in Nebraska?" she asked as they finished the last of the pie. Kit leaned back on his elbows, squinting up at the sky through the tree branches. "War changed everything. I enlisted in the Confederate cavalry at 18 not because I believed in the cause, but because everyone I knew was joining. Seemed like the thing to do." Maddie listened quietly. The Civil War had ended 9 years ago, but its shadows still stretched long across the country. 2 years in, I knew I'd made a mistake, Kit continued. Couldn't stomach what I was seeing, what I was part of. So one night I just rode north and kept going. Ended up working cattle drives up from Texas, learning the business. Saved every penny until I could put a down payment on my place here. That's why some people in town are wary of you, Maddie realized. You were a Confederate, and a deserter by some accounts. Kit's eyes met hers. I don't hide my past, but I don't advertise it either. The war made deserters of many good men, Maddie said softly. My father treated wounded soldiers from both sides in Philadelphia. He always said the tragedy wasn't just those who died, but those who lived with what they'd seen and done. Kit studied her face. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Maddie smiled at the memory. A doctor who believed in healing bodies and souls. My mother was his nurse. They died within months of each other, typhoid fever. I'm sorry. Kit's hand covered hers briefly, warm and calloused. Losing both parents so close together must have been difficult. It was, but they taught me resilience. Maddie looked around at the vast prairie stretching to the horizon. And now I'm here, having adventures just like I wanted. Including nearly being burned alive, Kit noted wryly. Yes, well, perhaps not exactly the adventure I had in mind, she laughed. Though it did introduce me to a mysterious Texas cowboy, so I can't complain too much. The afternoon passed pleasantly as Kit helped Maddie collect and identify wildflowers for her classroom. He knew the prairie intimately, which plants were medicinal, which were poisonous, which bloomed in different seasons. His knowledge impressed her. This was no uneducated ranch hand, but a man who paid attention to the world around him. As the sun began to lower, they packed up the wagon for the return to town. Kit helped Maddie up to the seat, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. The simple contact sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. I've enjoyed today, he said, his voice lower than before, more than I expected to. As have I, Maddie admitted, though I fear my reputation may suffer for it. Kit climbed up beside her. Would that trouble you greatly? Maddie considered the question as they started back toward Black Hawk. I've always believed that living to please others is a recipe for unhappiness, but I also understand the realities of my position. The school teacher must be above reproach, Kit quoted the mayor with a slight smile. Wouldn't want to jeopardize your standing. My standing is important, Maddie acknowledged, but so is living honestly. I enjoyed your company today, Kit Donovan, and I won't pretend otherwise to appease town gossips. His smile deepened. You're not like most women I've met, Madeline Ellis. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. As they approached town, Kit grew more serious. School starts tomorrow, doesn't it? Maddie nodded. 37 students ranging from barely reading to advanced mathematics. I'm nervous if I'm being honest. You'll do fine. These kids need someone who cares about their education. Most of their parents are just trying to keep food on the table and survive the winters. Will you come to our harvest festival next month? Maddie asked impulsively. The students will be presenting their work, and we're planning recitations and music. Don't reckon I've ever been invited to a school function before, Kit said with surprise. But yes, I'd be honored to attend. When they reached town, Kit drove directly to the boarding house rather than leaving her at the schoolhouse as they'd originally planned. Fewer eyes to watch us say goodbye, he explained. He helped her down from the wagon, handing her the basket of carefully pressed wildflowers they'd collected. For a moment they stood close, neither quite ready to part. Thank you for today, Maddie said softly. For the flowers, the picnic, and the company. My pleasure. Kit hesitated, then reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face that had escaped her pins. The gentle touch sent a shiver down her spine. Good luck tomorrow, school teacher. Those kids don't know how fortunate they are. Before she could respond, he stepped back, tipped his hat, and returned to his wagon. Maddie watched him drive away, her emotions a confusing tangle of attraction, uncertainty, and a strange sense that something significant had just begun. The first day of school proved even more challenging than Maddie had anticipated. Her students arrived in varying states of preparedness, some clearly unwashed, others in their Sunday best, some eager to learn, others openly resentful of being pulled from ranch work for book learning. By the time she dismissed the class at 4 o'clock, Maddie was exhausted but satisfied. She'd established basic rules, assessed reading and mathematics levels, and even managed to use her wildflower collection for a brief nature study that captured the interest of even her most reluctant students. As the children scattered into the afternoon sunshine, Maddie noticed a familiar figure leaning against a fence post across the road. Kit stood watching, his horse ground tied nearby. When he saw her notice him, he straightened and crossed to the schoolhouse. "Thought you might need this after your first day," he said, presenting her with a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside, Maddie found a hand-carved whistle made from some light-colored wood. "For getting their attention," Kit explained. "My third-grade teacher had one. Worked better than shouting herself hoarse." Maddie was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "You carved this yourself?" Winter nights get long on the ranch. Took up whittling to pass the time. He shrugged as if embarrassed by the admission. "It's beautiful, thank you." On impulse, Maddie rose on tiptoes and kissed his cheek. The brief contact left both of them momentarily speechless. Kit recovered first, clearing his throat. "How'd they do? The students?" Maddie welcomed the change of subject. "Better than I expected in some ways, worse in others. The Rogers twins can barely write their names, but they recited multiplication tables from memory. And Martha Jenkins has clearly read every book she could get her hands on. Old man Jenkins trades cattle for books whenever he can. Their cabin's full of them." Kit smiled. "Sounds like you've got your work cut out for you." "It's why I'm here," Maddie said, her enthusiasm returning, "to make a difference." Over the next few weeks, a pattern emerged. Kit would appear at the schoolhouse every few days, sometimes just to say hello, other times bringing small gifts, a jar of honey from a farmer he knew, a particularly interesting rock formation he'd found, once even a harmonica for the music lessons Maddie had mentioned wanting to start. Each time they would talk for a few minutes, their conversations growing more personal, more meaningful. Maddie learned about Kit's dreams for his ranch, his love of horses, his self-taught knowledge of the stars. He learned about her childhood in Philadelphia, her love of literature, her determination to prove herself as more than just a lady from back east. The town noticed, of course. Maddie overheard whispers when she shopped at the general store. She saw the speculative glances when Kit tipped his hat to her after church. Mayor Simmons made a point of reminding her about the moral character clause in her contract during his monthly inspection of the school, but to Maddie's surprise, not all the reaction was negative. Mrs. Pennyworth at the boarding house started packing extra biscuits for her to give to that nice Donovan boy. Several parents commented approvingly on the new books and supplies that mysteriously appeared in the schoolhouse items Maddie knew came from Kit's quiet generosity. And when autumn storms flooded the creek near the school, it was Kit who organized the men to build a footbridge so the children could cross safely. The Harvest Festival in late October marked a turning point. The schoolhouse was transformed with autumn decorations, student artwork, and displays of academic achievement. Parents and townsfolk filled the small building to capacity, admiring the children's work and enjoying the simple refreshments. When Kit arrived, dressed in his best clothes with his dark hair slicked back, a hush fell over the crowd. But then old Mrs. Haverford, whose grandson had recently learned to read under Maddie's tutelage, stepped forward and guided Kit to a seat she'd been saving for our schoolteacher's gentleman friend. Maddie caught Kit's eye from across the room and couldn't help smiling at his obvious discomfort with the attention. But he stayed, applauding enthusiastically for each student's recitation and lingering afterward to help clean up. As they carried the last of the decorations to the storage shed behind the schoolhouse, Kit finally broached the subject they'd been dancing around for weeks. "People are talking about us," he said, setting down a box of paper leaves and pumpkins. "People always talk," Maddie replied, trying to sound more nonchalant than she felt. "It's what they do in small towns. This is different there." Kit ran a hand through his hair, disturbing its careful arrangement. "They're starting to see us as a couple." Maddie's heart quickened. "And how do you feel about that, truthfully?" Kit stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "I've been thinking about courting you properly since the day of that prairie fire. But I know what people think of me, and I know how important your position is. I don't want to be the reason you lose something you care about." Maddie took a deep breath. "Do you know what I almost lost in that fire, Kit? My life. And you saved it. That has a way of clarifying one's priorities." She reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his. "I care about my students and my teaching, but I also care about you. More than I perhaps should, given how short a time we've known each other." Kit's other hand came up to cup her cheek. "Time's a funny thing out here on the prairie. Life can change in an instant: a fire, a storm, a moment of courage or cowardice. Sometimes you just know when something's right." "And is this right?" Maddie whispered. Instead of answering with words, Kit lowered his head and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, questioning at first, then deepening as Maddie responded, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing quickly. "I'd say that answers the question," Maddie said with a shaky laugh. Kit smiled, but his eyes remained serious. "I want to court you properly, Madeline Ellis. With your permission and with respect for your position. No sneaking around, no giving anyone cause to question your character." "I'd like that," Maddie said softly. "Very much." The news of their official courtship spread through Black Hawk with predictable speed. Most reactions were positive. The town had grown fond of their dedicated new schoolteacher. And Kit's actions during the recent flooding had reminded everyone of his worth to the community. Even Mayor Simmons could only harumph and mutter about propriety, before grudgingly acknowledging that at least they were being open about their intentions. Rebecca Hargrove, the banker's daughter whose broken engagement to Kit had been the subject of gossip, surprised Maddie by calling on her at the boarding house one evening in early November. "I thought I should speak with you directly," the blonde woman said, sitting stiffly in Mrs. Pennyworth's parlor. "About Kit Donovan," Maddie steeled herself. "If you've come to warn me, no." Rebecca shook her head quickly. "No warnings, quite the opposite, in fact." She twisted her handkerchief nervously. "Keith and I were engaged 2 years ago, it's true. But it was my father's idea more than ours. My father was impressed with Keith's ranch, thought it showed promise." Maddie listened, surprised by this candid admission. "Keith broke it off when he realized I was only going through with it to please my father." Rebecca's eyes met Maddie's. "He was kind about it, said I deserved someone who loved me for myself, not for my father's money or connections. He was right." "That sounds like Kit," Maddie said softly. Rebecca smiled faintly. "Yes, it does. I'm married to a merchant from Omaha now. Much happier than I would have been trying to be a rancher's wife." She stood, preparing to leave. "I just wanted you to know Kit Donovan is a good man, better than most in this town give him credit for." "Thank you for telling me," Maddie said, genuinely touched by the woman's gesture. "Be happy, Miss Ellis. It's not always easy to find in places like Black Hawk." As autumn deepened toward winter, Kit's courtship of Maddie became a fixture of town life. He escorted her to church each Sunday, joined her for dinner at the boarding house twice a week, and helped organize a Thanksgiving celebration at the schoolhouse that brought the entire community together. Their relationship grew stronger with each passing day. Maddie found herself falling deeply in love with the quiet, thoughtful cowboy, whose actions spoke louder than his words. His integrity, his kindness to her students, his respect for her independence all confirmed what she'd sensed from their first meeting. For his part, Kit seemed to bloom under Maddie's attention. The reserved man who'd kept to himself for years now participated in community events, donated books to the school library, and even joined the town council when a position opened. "You've changed him, Mrs. Pennyworth observed one evening as she and Maddie watched Kit help hang Christmas decorations in the town square. "Brought him out of his shell." "I think he was just waiting for a reason to join in," Maddie said. "Sometimes people need to know they're wanted before they'll risk belonging." The first major snowstorm of the season arrived in mid-December, blanketing Black Hawk in 2 feet of snow that brought normal activities to a halt. School was canceled for 3 days while the town dug itself out. Kit, who had ridden into town just ahead of the storm to help prepare the schoolhouse for the weather, found himself temporarily stranded. Mayor Simmons, conscious of propriety, arranged for Kit to stay at the hotel rather than the boarding house where Maddie lived. But they still spent the snow-bound days together, reading by the fire in the boarding house parlor under Mrs. Pennyworth's watchful but approving eye, taking walks through the pristine white landscape, and planning the school's Christmas pageant. On the third evening, as they stood on the boarding house porch watching the spectacular sunset paint the snow-covered prairie in shades of pink and gold, Kit took Maddie's gloved hand in his. "I've been thinking," he said, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "About us, about the future." Maddie's heart skipped. "Have you?" Kit turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "I know it hasn't been long by most standards, but out here." He gestured at the vast landscape. "Out here, we understand how quickly life can change, how precious each day is." "We do," Maddie agreed softly. "I love you, Madeline Ellis." Kit's voice was steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I think I've loved you since I saw you standing alone against that fire, refusing to give up even when all hope seemed lost." Maddie felt tears welling in her eyes. "I love you too, Kit, so much it frightens me sometimes." "Then marry me." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Inside was a delicate gold ring with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right woman to give it to." "Kit." Maddie's voice caught. "Are you certain?" "Your ranch, my teaching, will make it work," he said with conviction. "Your school is important to you and to this town. I'd never ask you to give it up, and my ranch is only 5 miles north, close enough to ride in each day if needed." The practical considerations were real, but in that moment, looking into Kit's eyes, Maddie knew there was only one answer she could give. "Yes," she said, her face breaking into a radiant smile. "Yes, I will marry you, Kit Donovan." Kit slipped the ring onto her finger over her glove, promising a proper fitting later, and then gathered her into his arms, kissing her with such tenderness that Maddie felt her heart might burst with happiness. When they parted, Mrs. Pennyworth was standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "About time," the older woman said gruffly. "Now come inside before you both catch your death. We've got a wedding to plan." News of their engagement spread quickly once the roads were cleared. Most of the town reacted with genuine pleasure. Kit was approached with handshakes and backslaps wherever he went, while Maddie received hugs and offers of help with wedding preparations from women who had once regarded her with suspicion as the Eastern lady. They set the date for April, after the worst of winter had passed, but before spring planting demanded everyone's attention. Kit threw himself into preparing for their life together, adding a second bedroom to his ranch house, and beginning work on a proper parlor where Maddie could entertain her students or fellow teachers. Maddie continued teaching, incorporating her upcoming marriage into practical lessons for her students, having the older girls help calculate fabric needs for a wedding dress, asking the boys to write essays about responsibility and partnership, teaching everyone to make paper decorations that would eventually adorn the church for the ceremony. But their happiness faced an unexpected challenge in late January when a letter arrived for Kit from Texas. Maddie was at the schoolhouse when Mayor Simmons delivered it personally, his expression grave. "This came for Donovan," he said, handing her the envelope. Ryder brought it special from the railroad station in Grand Island. Maddie thanked him, puzzled by his somber demeanor. She kept the letter on her desk, intending to give it to Kit that evening when he came to escort her to dinner at the hotel. When Kit arrived, snow dusting his shoulders and hat, his smile faded at the sight of the envelope in Maddie's hand. "Texas," he said quietly, recognizing the postmark. "Mayor Simmons brought it by, said it came special from Grand Island." Maddie studied his face, noting the tension that had appeared around his eyes. "Kit, what is it? What's wrong?" He took the letter, his movements deliberate as he opened it and scanned its contents. His expression darkened with each line. "My brother," he finally said, refolding the paper. "My younger brother Matthew is in trouble. He's been accused of cattle rustling." "I didn't know you had a brother," Maddie said, surprised. Kit sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We haven't spoken in years, not since I left Texas during the war. He was just 16 then, still at home with our parents. What does he want from you now? He says he's innocent. Needs me to come testify to his character, help pay for a lawyer." Kit's jaw tightened. "Says if I don't, they'll likely hang him by spring." Maddie felt cold dread settling in her stomach. "You have to go to him." "I can't just leave everything, the ranch, our wedding plans. You have to," Maddie repeated firmly. "He's your brother, Kit. Whatever has happened between you, he's your family." Kit paced the small schoolroom, conflict evident in every line of his body. It would mean weeks away, maybe longer. The trial might not start until March. "Then we'll delay the wedding," Maddie said, though the thought pained her. "Your brother's life is at stake." Kit stopped pacing and looked at her, his expression softening. "Do you know how remarkable you are, Madeline Ellis? Most women would be furious at postponing their wedding for a brother they'd never even heard of." "I'm not most women," Maddie reminded him with a small smile. "And you're not most men. It's why we suit each other so well." Kit crossed to her and took her hands in his. "I swear to you I'll be back as soon as I can, and I'll write every chance I get." "I know you will." Maddie squeezed his hands. "When will you leave?" "First light tomorrow." "If I push hard, I can reach the railroad at Grand Island by nightfall, catch the southbound train the next morning." That evening, they explained the situation to Mrs. Pennyworth and made arrangements for Kit's ranch hands to keep the operation running in his absence. Maddie helped him pack, her heart heavy but her resolve firm. This was the man she loved, a man who would ride hundreds of miles to help a brother who had been estranged from him for years. How could she do anything but support him? Their goodbye the next morning was painful but mercifully brief. Dawn was just breaking as Kit mounted his horse outside the boarding house, his saddlebags packed for the journey. "I'll be back by April," he promised, leaning down to kiss her one last time. "Even if I have to break my brother out of jail and bring him with me." Maddie managed a laugh through her tears. "Just come back to me, Kit Donovan. That's all I ask. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." With a final tip of his hat, he turned his mount toward the road east and rode away, his figure gradually disappearing into the rising sun. The weeks that followed tested Maddie's strength and patience. True to his word, Kit wrote whenever he could, his letters traveling the slow route from southern Texas to Nebraska. From them, Maddie pieced together the situation. Matthew Donovan had indeed been falsely accused, framed by a cattle baron who wanted his small ranch. Kit had arrived in time to help secure a decent lawyer and was working to gather evidence of his brother's innocence. Maddie kept busy with her teaching and continued preparations for their delayed wedding, now planned for early June. But as March turned to April with no word of Kit's return, she couldn't help but worry. His letters had become less frequent, his last one hinting at complications in the case. The Prairie spring arrived with its usual drama thunderstorms that shook the schoolhouse, followed by explosions of wildflowers across the landscape that had been scorched by fire the previous summer. Maddie took her students on nature walks, showing them how even the blackened earth from the fire had transformed into a riot of new growth. "Life finds a way," she told them, thinking of Kit and the obstacles they were overcoming. "Even after destruction, beauty returns." It was the first week of May when disaster struck again. A late spring storm system stalled over Nebraska, bringing 3 days of torrential rain that swelled creeks and rivers beyond their banks. Black Hawk, situated on higher ground, was spared the worst of the flooding, but outlying farms and ranches weren't so fortunate. Maddie was helping organize relief efforts at the church when a mud-covered rider arrived with news that chilled her blood. "Donovan Ranch is underwater," the man reported, accepting a cup of coffee with shaking hands. "Creek overflowed its banks, took out the south pasture fencing. Hands are trying to move the cattle to higher ground, but they're struggling." Without hesitation, Maddie gathered supplies, borrowed a horse from the livery stable, and rode north through the rain toward Kit's ranch. The mayor protested that it was too dangerous, but Mrs. Pennyworth silenced him with a look. "That'll be her home in a month's time," the boarding house keeper said firmly. "You do the same for your own place." The 5-mile ride took nearly 2 hours in the difficult conditions. When Maddie finally crested the ridge overlooking Kit's ranch, her heart sank. The normally peaceful creek had become a raging torrent that had indeed breached its banks, flooding the lower pastures. The main house, situated on a small rise, was still above water, but only barely. In the distance, she could see cowboys on horseback struggling to drive a herd of frightened cattle toward higher ground. Maddie rode directly to the house, where she found Kit's foreman, a weathered man named Hank, attempting to sandbag the doors against the rising water. "Miss Ellis," he exclaimed, surprised to see the schoolteacher. "You shouldn't be out in this." "I came to help," Maddie said, dismounting and immediately grabbing a sandbag. "What needs doing?" For the next several hours, Maddie worked alongside the ranch hands who weren't managing the cattle, moving furniture to upper floors, securing important documents, and continuing the ultimately futile effort to keep water from entering the house. By nightfall, they had retreated to the second floor, watching as the lower level gradually filled with muddy water. "Water's still rising," Hank said grimly, peering out the window at the rain that continued to fall. "If it don't stop soon, we'll need to abandon the house altogether." Maddie thought of all Kit's careful preparations for their life together: the new bedroom with its handmade furniture, the parlor he'd been building as a surprise. "We can't just give up," she insisted. "Ain't giving up, Miss Ellis. Just being practical. Boss would have my hide if I let anything happen to you because we stayed too long." Just then, they heard a shout from outside. One of the cowboys was pointing toward the ridge to the south, the direction of Black Hawk. A line of riders was approaching, at least 20 men on horseback. "Reinforcements," Hank said with relief. The riders proved to be townsfolk from Black Hawk, led by Mayor Simmons himself. They brought additional supplies, more sandbags, and crucially, news that the rain was finally tapering off upstream. Telegraph from Grand Island says the storm's moving east, the mayor reported as he shed his dripping oilskin coat inside the increasingly crowded second floor. Should stop here by morning. With the additional help, they managed to divert some of the floodwater away from the house using improvised channels. By dawn, as predicted, the rain had stopped, and the water level had begun to slowly recede. Maddie stood on the porch, exhausted but triumphant, surveying the damage in the early morning light. The house had suffered. Certainly the entire ground floor would need rebuilding, but it was still standing. Most of the cattle had been saved, moved to higher pastures north of the ranch. And most importantly, no lives had been lost. "You did good, Miss Ellis," Hank said, joining her on the porch. "Boss will be proud when he gets back." "When do you expect him?" Maddie asked, realizing she hadn't received a letter in almost 2 weeks. Hank looked uncomfortable. "Ain't heard from him direct in a while. Last telegram said they were close to proving his brother's innocence, but there was some complication with the cattle baron who framed him. Might be another week or two." Maddie nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Well, by then we'll have this place back in order for him." And that became her mission over the next week. Maddie divided her time between teaching and overseeing repairs at the ranch. The town rallied behind her effort, with men volunteering labor and women preparing meals for the workers. Even Mayor Simmons pitched in, organizing a work party to rebuild the damaged sections of the house. "Never seen a town come together like this for a man who isn't even here," Hank commented to Maddie as they watched a crew of volunteers installing new floorboards. "They're not doing it just for Kit," Maddie said. "They're doing it for us for what we represent." "And what's that, Miss Ellis?" Maddie smiled. "Hope, I suppose. The idea that even in the hardest circumstances, good things are possible." It was nearly 2 weeks after the flood, with repairs well underway, when a rider appeared on the ridge overlooking the ranch. Maddie, who was helping paint the newly rebuilt parlor, didn't notice at first. It was only when Hank called her name from outside that she looked up. "Miss Ellis. You might want to come see this." Wiping paint from her hands, Maddie stepped onto the porch. The lone rider was moving slowly down the slope toward the ranch house, leading a second horse behind him. Even at a distance, there was something familiar about his posture in the saddle. "Kit," she whispered, her paintbrush clattering to the porch as she lifted her skirts and began running toward him. Kit saw her coming and urged his tired horse to a faster pace. They met in the middle of the yard, Kit swinging down from his saddle just in time to catch Maddie as she flung herself into his arms. "You're here," she said between kisses, scarcely believing he was real. "You're finally here." "I told you wild horses couldn't keep me away," Kit said, his voice rough with emotion. "Though I nearly had to outrun some trying to get back to you." Over dinner that evening, with Hank and the other hands gathered around to hear the tale, Kit explained what had happened in Texas. His brother Matthew had indeed been framed by a wealthy rancher named Thornton who coveted his land. "We managed to prove Matt's innocence with testimony from neighboring ranchers who'd seen Thornton's men moving the supposedly stolen cattle," Kit explained. "But Thornton didn't take the defeat well. Hired some men to make sure we didn't make it back to the ranch." "Good Lord," Maddie breathed, gripping Kit's hand tightly. "Matt and I split up, figured they couldn't follow both of us. I led them on a chase through Apache territory while Matt headed for Mexico. Plan is for him to lie low there for a few months until things cool down." "And the men following you?" Mayor Simmons asked. He had come out to the ranch when word of Kit's return reached town. "Lost them in the mountains. Doubt they'd follow this far north anyway, too far from their paymaster." Kit looked around at the newly repaired house. "Now, someone want to tell me what happened here while I was gone. Place looks better than when I left it." Hank launched into the story of the flood, with others chiming in about Maddie's leadership during the crisis. Kit listened with growing amazement, his eyes rarely leaving Maddie's face. "You saved my ranch," he said when they'd finished. "You and the whole town." Mayor Simmons cleared his throat. "Miss Ellis reminded us what community means, Donovan. We might have our differences, but when trouble comes, Black Hawk stands together." Later, after the others had gone and they finally had a moment alone, Kit took Maddie's hands in his. "I can't believe what you've done. Riding out in a flood, organizing repairs. You're extraordinary." "I protected what was important to you because it's important to me too," Maddie said simply. "This is going to be our home, Kit. I wasn't about to let a little water wash away our future." Kit's eyes shone with emotion. "I don't want to wait until June. Marry me now, Maddie, this week. We've faced fire and flood and distance. I don't want to tempt fate any further." Maddie laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "Is that a proper proposal, Mr. Donovan? As proper as I can make it." Kit dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Madeline Ellis, love of my life, woman who faced down prairie fires and floods without flinching, would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife this Sunday after church?" "This Sunday?" Maddie pretended to consider. "I suppose that gives Mrs. Pennyworth just enough time to bake a cake." "Yes, Kit Donovan, I will marry you on Sunday." The wedding of Kit Donovan and Madeline Ellis became one of Black Hawk's most celebrated events. The entire town turned out, packing the small church to capacity. Maddie's students lined the aisle, tossing flower petals as she walked toward Kit, radiant in a cream-colored dress that the town's women had worked on in secret during his absence. Reverend Goodwin, who had watched their relationship develop with quiet approval, delivered a sermon about love's power to transform not just two people but an entire community. Mayor Simmons, in his capacity as town leader, presented them with a hand-carved sign for their ranch that read Donovan Homestead, ESD. 1874, the year they had met during the Prairie Fire. At the reception held on the schoolhouse grounds, Hank surprised everyone by revealing a hidden talent for fiddle playing, while Mrs. Pennyworth's cake, 3 tiers of vanilla sponge with strawberry preserves, disappeared within minutes. As evening approached and lanterns were lit around the schoolyard, Kit drew Maddie away from the celebration for a moment of privacy behind the building where they had first declared their love. "Happy, Mrs. Donovan?" he asked, still savoring the sound of her new name. "Completely." Maddie smiled up at him. "Though I hope you know the school board has agreed to let me continue teaching through next year, Mrs. Donovan will still be Miss Ellis in the classroom." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Kit assured her. "You were born to teach, just as I was born to ranch." "We'll make it work." "We already have," Maddie pointed out, gesturing toward the celebration where their two worlds had merged seamlessly, ranch hands dancing with townspeople, her students playing with children from outlying farms, the mayor deep in conversation with Hank about cattle prices. Kit nodded, drawing her closer. "You know, when I rode toward that prairie fire last summer, I was just trying to save a stranger's life, had no idea I was riding toward my own future. And when I found myself surrounded by flames, I thought it was the end," Maddie said softly. "I never dreamed it was just the beginning." Kit kissed her then, as the music from the fiddle drifted around them and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Behind them, the prairie stretched endlessly, its grasses now lush and green where fire had once raged, a testament to renewal, and the unexpected paths that lead to love. Epilogue. 5 years later, the wildflowers were particularly vibrant the summer of 1879, carpeting the Nebraska prairie in a riot of color that stretched from the Donovan ranch house all the way to the horizon. Maddie stood on the wide front porch, shading her eyes against the morning sun as she watched Kit leading their 3-year-old son Thomas on a pony around the corral. "Careful, Tommy," she called, though she knew Kit would never let the boy fall. "He's fine, Mama," came a voice beside her. 7-year-old Sarah, their adopted daughter, looked up from the book she was reading. They had taken her in 2 years earlier, after her parents, farmers who'd lived on the neighboring property, died in a winter blizzard. "I know he is, with your father watching him," Maddie agreed, smoothing Sarah's dark hair. "How's your reading coming along? Ready for your recitation tomorrow?" Sarah nodded confidently. "I've been practicing." As the daughter of the schoolteacher and one of Black Hawk's most respected ranchers, she took her studies very seriously. The Donovan ranch had prospered beyond anyone's expectations. Kit's innovative breeding programs and fair business practices had earned him a reputation throughout Nebraska territory. The original ranch house had expanded to include not just the parlor he'd planned before their wedding, but a proper library filled with books, a music room with the piano Maddie had always wanted, and bedrooms for their growing family. Maddie had continued teaching for 2 years after their marriage, finally stepping back when she was expecting Thomas. But she hadn't abandoned education. Instead, she'd established a lending library in town and ran a weekly literature circle for women and girls that had become one of Black Hawk's most popular gatherings. The town itself had grown considerably, with a railroad spur now connecting it to the main line at Grand Island. New businesses had opened, including a proper hotel, a millinery shop, and most excitingly, a small printing press that produced the Black Hawk Weekly Chronicle, where Maddie occasionally contributed articles on education and women's interests. "Mail's here," Kit called, lifting Tommy from the pony and carrying him toward the house. Sarah abandoned her book and raced down the steps to meet them, always eager for letters. "Anything good?" Maddie asked as they climbed the porch steps together. Kit handed her several envelopes. "Letter from Matthew in San Antonio." His brother had eventually returned from Mexico and established himself as a horse trader in Texas, now happily married with a daughter of his own. "And something from Philadelphia that looks important." Maddie examined the formal-looking envelope with surprise. "It's from the National Education Association." She quickly broke the seal and scanned the contents, her eyes widening. "They want to publish my essay on frontier education methods in their quarterly journal. That's wonderful." Kit swept her into a one-armed embrace, still holding Tommy with the other. "I told you those articles you wrote for the Chronicle would get noticed eventually." "Mama's going to be famous," Sarah declared with certainty. Maddie laughed, her heart full as she looked at her family. "Hardly famous, sweetheart, but it is exciting to share our experiences here with educators back east." Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Kit and Maddie sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the prairie in the same fiery hues that had brought them together. "Hard to believe it's been 5 years," Kit said, his arm around her shoulders. "Feels like yesterday sometimes." "And like forever in others," Maddie agreed, leaning against him, "in the best possible way." Kit kissed the top of her head. "Any regrets about coming west, about staying?" Maddie didn't need to consider the question. "Not a single one. Every challenge we've faced, the fire, the flood, the blizzard that brought us Sarah, each one has only made us stronger." "Speaking of challenges," Kit said, a smile in his voice, "Doctor Martin mentioned he's looking for someone to teach anatomy and basic medical care to interested women in town. Said a certain school teacher with a doctor father might be the perfect candidate. Maddie sat up straighter, intrigued. Did he really? That could be incredibly valuable for the outlying farms, having women with basic medical knowledge. Thought you'd like the idea. Kit chuckled. Always need a new mountain to climb, don't you, Mrs. Donovan? Life without growth is just existence, Maddie quoted her father. Besides, you're hardly one to talk. Didn't Mayor Simmons, I mean Governor Simmons, now just ask you to serve on that Territorial Agricultural Commission? Might have, Kit admitted. Would mean some travel to Lincoln now and then. We'll manage. The children and I could come with you sometimes. It would be educational. They lapsed into comfortable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the soft sounds of their children breathing in peaceful sleep. Tommy, with his father's blue eyes and determined spirit. Sarah, with her quick mind and generous heart. All around them, the ranch that had nearly been lost to flood now thrived, a testament to hard work and community. 5 years ago tonight, you proposed to me right here on this porch, Maddie said softly. You just returned from Texas, and I just helped save the ranch from flooding. Best decision I ever made, Kit murmured, drawing her closer. Marrying you just as soon as we could arrange it. Even though the parlor floor was still drying from the flood repairs, Maddie teased, especially then. Life doesn't wait for perfect conditions, Maddie. You taught me that. Kit turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. When I rode toward that prairie fire all those years ago, I had no idea I was riding toward everything I'd ever need. And I had no idea, surrounded by flames with nowhere to run, that I'd found not just safety but home. Maddie reached up to touch his face, still handsome and now so beloved. You didn't just create a path through the fire, Kit Donovan. You showed me the way to a life I never knew I wanted until I found it. Kit kissed her then, a kiss filled with 5 years of shared joy and trials, and promises of many more to come. Above them, stars filled the Nebraska sky, as vast and full of possibility as the day they'd met. On the horizon, where fire had once threatened everything, wildflowers now bloomed in abundance, nature's reminder that even the most destructive forces can give way to unexpected beauty when the right elements come together at the right time. For Kit and Maddie Donovan, that time had been a desperate moment during a prairie fire in 1874, and every day since had confirmed what they'd somehow known even then, that some fires don't destroy. They illuminate the path to where you're meant to be.